Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our evening called Let's Make It Simple, Parenting Strategies to Support Positive Mental Health. We are so thrilled that you are here with us, whether you are coming to us live or whether you are joining us after the fact and watching our recording. We just are so thrilled that you are joining us for this very important topic. We know that mental health and wellness of our students and your children is becoming increasingly important, especially in the light of what has happened during COVID. The pandemic has definitely put some additional stress on our kids and on ourselves and on our schools. And we need to know how to best support the children in our care. Our staff have been trained in mental health literacy, and one of our division priorities is to focus on supporting student mental health and well-being. We know that when we focus on student mental health, we support student success. When students are in a state of emotional, behavioral, and social well-being, they are able to enjoy life and deal with all of its challenges. We also know that many parents, guardians, and caretakers have been wondering how to best support their child's mental health. We want parents to walk alongside on the journey so we can all work together to support our children. Thanks again for joining us, and we will begin with prayer and our treaty land acknowledgement. Please join me in the sign of our faith. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, we pray for our children growing up in a beautiful but sometimes unsteady world. Help us show them that your ways give more life than the ways of the world, and that following you is the path to true joy. Help them take any struggle or failure not as a measure of their worth, but as a chance for a new start. Give them strength to hold their faith in you and to keep alive their joy in your creation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Please join me now as we acknowledge the land on which we gather. We are a party to Treaty 6, and as such, we wish to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground for many Indigenous peoples. We recognize the diversity of First Nations who have at one time lived across the territory, as well as the presence of the Métis Nation. And our team here at Star Catholic, I am Chris Pirro. I'm Director of Student Services. And Claire, I'll let you introduce yourself. That was your role.
Thank you. I am Claire Ganton, and I am our Director of Faith Life and Religious Education. We also have a Division Wellness Coordinator who's not here with us tonight, but her name is Michelle Horby, and you may hear her name if you are talking to staff at our school. We would also like to introduce our presenter for this evening. At our first parent session that we held back in February, we explored mental health literacy, that what we say and the words we use surrounding mental health really matter. They are important. And so you can view the presentation, our previous presentation, on the same YouTube channel where you're watching this presentation. When we surveyed parents and guardians following that session, the #1 topic that was requested was this topic: parenting strategies that support positive mental health for our children and our teens. And so when we were thinking about this topic, we knew we had to bring Kathy Gerald back for a second opportunity for her to speak to you, our parents and our guardians. Kathy is a member of the Alberta School Mental Health Literacy Project, and she joined them in 2019. She's been with Alberta Health Services in a mental health capacity building role since 2013, serving as an education consultant and clinical consultant to support rural educators, physicians, clinicians, and other service providers in their work with children and youth. Kathy also works with Mount Royal University and serves as a subject matter expert for the Children's Mental Health Certificate Program and has taught clinical courses in the social work program. Within Alberta Health Services, Kathy has partnered with the Provincial Mental Health Promotion and Injury Prevention Team to deliver training in disaster preparedness and has facilitated school-based psychological first aid. She's a very busy lady. She continues to provide counseling in her private practice. Chris and I would both, I know, would say that she has been a wonderful mentor to us and a partner to Star Catholic as we have journeyed and continue to journey in our better understanding of students, their mental health needs, and how to best support staff in supporting students. Like I said, she presented at our first virtual parent evening, and we are so pleased to welcome her back this evening. So thank you, Kathy, for being with us. Before we begin with Kathy, I would also just like to remind any of you who are watching that we do have a live chat that is going on right now. So if you have any questions for Kathy during the presentation, you can type into that chat and we will moderate the chat, and any questions that come forward, we will bring those to Kathy as appropriate. So we'll make sure that we answer all of those questions for you. You can also email me if you need to, but I recommend that you use the chat because that'll be the fastest way of making sure we get those questions. So thanks again for joining us, Kathy, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Claire, and thank you, Chris. And welcome to anyone who's joining us live as well as viewing this at a later time. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, if I may. There we go. Okay. So it's a pleasure for me to be back with you. I hope I don't repeat myself too much, but I might. And we'll just call that on purpose as cementing those ideas. But hopefully, I think the idea tonight is to offer a number of different points for you, tips and strategies. It seems like parents are always looking for strategies. And I think, honestly, the title of this is great, but it's a little bit deceptive because things can be simple, but not easy, right? So I think sometimes we can take a concept and think that it's simple to understand, not necessarily easy to implement. And I want to say I'm right there with you. And so I'd like to think about this, maybe because it's the supper hour, but I'm just going to offer you a buffet of different thoughts, different ideas to think about, different strategies. You might not like everything. You might sample something. You might try something on and come away with a different idea or even a better idea on how to incorporate that. But please know that I regard you as the expert for what works best for your family and what works best for your children. And for the two children that I have, my husband always said they were flip sides of the coin, right? So they came from us, but they are their own people, and things we thought we had figured out with the first just doesn't fit for the second. In fact, here they are right now. So these are my kiddos. And this was when my son decided that they were going to have Spider-Man drawings on their face. And even back then I thought, I know this is going to be funny. I'm a little annoyed right now, but I'm going to take a picture and then I'm going to talk about why they shouldn't be doing that. And here's a more recent picture of my kiddos. And I guess I just want to say that, Claire talked about my professional credentials in social work, but I would say to you that I've learned more just actually living with these humans and working with them. And so they've been my best teachers. And even being a social worker, talking about emotion, my son in grade 1, he could do a little booklet on anything, and he chose to talk about different feelings. And it was like, and the teacher said, well, guess the social worker as mom, guess which kid has a social worker as a mom. But even then, they have different struggles, different challenges. I'm proud of how they've both handled the different challenges that life has posed for them. But I want to say, first and foremost, I'm with you as a parent who we just try to do our best. Doesn't make it easy, doesn't make it simple. But my hope is that you will take some of these ideas and apply it where it fits for you. Yeah, so I know that in the questions that we talked about before, some ideas was, and maybe I'll just pick up on this right away. Claire, you mentioned about, this time of the pandemic has been really trying for everyone. And so sometimes I get asked, is there like a real mental health crisis? And certainly, educators are seeing it, and parents are also feeling the struggles. We've all had the struggles, but it hasn't all been the same for everyone. Right. And I really like this quote from a child psychiatrist in BC, Dr. Tyler Black, who says, instead of viewing the pandemic as a tsunami of mental health crises, we can view it as an event that disproportionately affected those that maybe we've always failed to protect. Right. So the most vulnerable have been hit the hardest through this time. And so I think that's very sobering. We also have to be careful when we hear different stuff thrown out in the media about mental health crises. So for example, the actual rate of suicide has decreased over the time of the pandemic. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of people struggling. There absolutely is. But we need to be careful about the information. We need to check it out. People have said, oh, because there's more use of sanitizers, is there going to be a huge extra rate of OCD? Well, that hasn't shown to be true. But absolutely, do we need more supports for mental health services? We sure do. It was insufficient before the pandemic, and it's insufficient now. But we do need to be careful about the information that we listen to. We also need to think about, is there a political agenda in the messaging? And we need to band together to support our children, whether they have a mental illness diagnosis or not. Yeah.
Kathy, can I just ask a question? Because
Yeah.
often we don't, we can't control always where our children, what our children listen to, or what they might hear from peers or other places. And I'm just wondering, if our child is asking questions about the pandemic, or they seem to be very nervous or concerned about the pandemic, and maybe they're even using that term of, oh, there's a mental health crisis, or it's really what might be the best way to maybe kind of not ignore those fears or concerns, but address them in an appropriate way?
That's such a great question, Claire. I think it's really valid to kind of delve in a little bit more, to kind of hold space for that question, because maybe there's something under that question for them. Maybe they're worried about a relative, for example, or maybe they've heard that all of us are doomed in this year because we'll never catch up in our studies. So I would be really curious about what's underneath that question. Are they worried about, sometimes kids they like absorb worries, right? And so maybe they're worried about finances. Maybe they're hearing about the gas prices, and they're hearing about mom and dad talking about the budget and all of that. And sometimes we just never know how that's landing for one of our kids. So I would have that open ear, just to kind of hear not only the first question, but say, what has you asked me that? What's that about, right? And just keep allowing that space, I think, is really important. I don't know about you, but sometimes, at certainly different ages of my kids, they weren't necessarily willing to sit down and have that heart to heart when I was. Sometimes the best conversations is when I was driving them somewhere, right? And they're looking out the window and they're like, "Whoa," or they're talking to a friend in the back seat, and you can hear some really interesting stuff then. So sometimes it's about not meeting head on, but just being open and available for those key times. Yeah. I don't know if that answered that.
It did. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, just kind of hear what's behind the question, I think, is always really important.
I know my mom always knew, or we always knew as her children, that we were about to have a serious conversation if she said, "Let's go for ice cream in the car." And it was like you were trapped there so that she could have a serious conversation.
Brilliant. Brilliant, I say. No, that's really good. It's really good. But yeah, we do have to be kind of cognizant of timing for when our kids are willing to open up to us, for sure. And sometimes it's even, in what mode of communication. Somewhere along the line, a friend cued me into, you know what? Kids are texting all the time. And the kind of texts that I was sending to my kids at that time were like, remember to empty the dishwasher kind of texts. And then I realized that was a different mode of communication that I could maybe connect with them. So I started connecting, I started texting more warm things, or, funny things, or other stuff that I thought they would enjoy. And they really warmed up to that. So one little tip. Here's tip number one, if you're
I
keeping track.
agree, Kathy, that texting has been very helpful. It's just an easy way to check in and kind of come to
Yeah,
their terms when they're ready to talk. 'Cause
absolutely.
it's not always on our agenda or our time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I know that we went over this before, and I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on it, but just kind of maybe as an introduction around how important it is that words matter. And so this is our pyramid of mental states. And so many of your children will be learning this in school. And I think we went over that the last recording. So I won't spend much time on this, but only to say that these are different states where we exist. So it's not a continuum. There's, hopefully more time in the bottom than at the top, or more of us at the bottom at the top. But mental distress, the idea of that is it's stress, right? And it's not to be pathologized. We're talking about the kind of day-to-day stress that happens that we can't avoid. And nor is it even a good thing to try to avoid all of our stress. I had to feel a little bit stressed today to get energy up for you tonight and to try to do my best, right? I can look at that as positive stress. A mental health problem, on the other hand, it's not like a diagnosable disorder, but it's a large something that happens that's big in our lives, that for a time really impacts our ability to function. So that could be grief. It could be the loss of a loved one. That's a tough experience for us. It's certainly not a mental illness, though, if we're grieving the loss of someone. It could be the loss of a dear relationship. It could be moving to a new country without sufficient supports. It could be the loss of a job that means a lot to someone, that's a part of their identity. And I just want to say, for some people, the experience of the pandemic would absolutely fit in here, right? And so we have to be cognizant of that. For some other families are saying, you know what, we were so overscheduled and running during this time. We actually had more family dinners and we prioritized where our energy went. And for some, it was really okay. For others, it was much more of a struggle, much more isolating, much more difficult. So we have to be aware of how that has hit people differently, right? And then, of course, a mental disorder or illness, we're talking about something that has been, a disorder, a health condition that's been properly diagnosed. And why that's important from differentiating it from stress or even a mental health problem is that there's evidence-based treatment to get people connected to that. Because if it's well managed, it can be handled and treated just as well as any other health condition, right? So it's important to differentiate that. That's why we talk so much in mental health literacy about how our words matter. And so what we're focusing on tonight is mental health. And sometimes when we hear the word mental health, people automatically go to mental illness, but it isn't. It's mental health as part of our overall health, right? And it's about our ability to meet challenges in our lives. And so we all have mental health. We don't lose our mental health if we have a mental disorder. In fact, some people with a mental disorder or illness have better mental health than someone who doesn't. Perhaps they've learned to manage their stress better. They've taken the time to really understand how to care for themselves and how to function well in the world. And so what we're going to be focusing on this evening is boosting our mental health, right? Because we all have it, and there's probably all kinds of strategies that we ourselves can do and what we can do to promote it for our kids. And before I forget, I want to say, long time ago, well, there's still stigma today, but there used to be all kinds of stigma around if a child had a mental illness, it must be poor parenting. And guess what? It was usually blamed on the mother. And it's, of course, absolutely not true. So we need to dispel that stigma, dispel that false notion, because it's absolutely not true.
Are there some things, Kathy, that a parent can sort of monitor to see where there's some shifts maybe in from moodiness to something that we should be more concerned about?
Absolutely. And I think the big thing is change in behavior, right? So if you're worried, kids have different baselines. There's kids that are more like Tigger and kids that are more like Eeyore. But if you see a real distinct change in behavior, and not for like one day after someone didn't have a good sleep, but something that's going on longer, that they're just not themselves, that's something to really pay attention to and to address. And of course, younger children will show that in their behavior, right? And older too. I don't think you can always just kind of dismiss it as, oh, must be just adolescence. They're going through a phase. Are they withdrawing? Are they changing the group of kids that they usually hang out with? Are they dropping out of extracurricular activities? What other kinds of signs are there? Are they, and then in more serious cases, are they starting to speak in ways that are really not adding up and not making sense? Are they becoming more withdrawn and avoidant? And then it's really important to check with other people close to your child as well. What are they seeing at school? Like, partner with your wonderful Star Catholic staff to say, I am concerned, and what are you seeing at school? And can we, look together and look to offer some support and wondering what's going on. Yeah. And then, of course, the first lines might be, again, is there some supports within your school? Is there supports with your family doctor, with local Alberta Health Services offices, all of those kinds of supports. If your employment maybe has employee family assistance programs, that can also be another support. Of course, there's always Access Mental Health to check out as well.
Thank you. So reach out.
Reach out. Absolutely. The more that we can catch things earlier, the better. Yeah. And again, what we're going to be talking about first in some of these strategies and stuff coming up might be the kind of the first things that you try, right? Maybe we need to help our child deal with stress more. Maybe we need to help them deal with big emotions and how we language that. So that's kind of some of the stuff we're going to be talking about this evening. Yeah, so emotions, right? And different families have different ideas about that. Certainly growing up in my family, I think certain feelings and emotions were more okay to express than others, right? So we all have that kind of history that we bring along to it. But I would like to say that, understanding our emotions goes a long way. I was just actually watching Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. I have the book, but there's now like an HBO special on it. And she was talking about, they interviewed 7,000 people to say, how many feelings can you identify when you're experiencing them? Guess how many feelings people could accurately identify when they were experiencing those feelings?
I'm going to guess 5.
I was going to say 3. So.
Chris, you're winner, chicken dinner. Yeah, 3. Isn't that sad? So mad, sad, and glad was what people were able to reliably identify. And so why is that such a big deal? Well, then we miss all of the nuances. We miss all of the ways that we can express ourselves. We miss how we can perceive reality, and actually reality changes by how we name it. That sounds a little out there. But when you think about it, if you don't have a word to even identify for yourself as well as express something, that's really limiting you, right? So let's think of, for example, if someone is angry, there's a whole bunch of feelings that might be connected to that, right? Are they hurt about something? Are they feeling scared around something? Are they disenchanted or demoralized, or, all of the words that can come with that? And as, Dr. Dan Siegel would say, when you name it, you tame it. right? So even just being able to identify more clearly how we're feeling really gives us more options around what to do next. So here's kind of my first example of what we can best do for starting young is to help kids learn a larger vocabulary of feeling words and where they feel it in their bodies, and to say that emotions is good information for us to know, right? And emotions change at different, different states that we have, different levels of feelings, mixes of feelings. Being able to identify that and have words for that goes a really long way for a child being able to regulate their emotions, how they're feeling. Anything to add there, Chris or Claire?
I just was thinking that, this is probably something, that most adults could use help with as well. I was thinking about myself and certainly growing up, I had many siblings, and we talked about our emotions a lot, usually at an upper volume. But I think most people of my generation, and we weren't really ever taught how to speak about our emotions and to identify our emotions outside of, like you said, mad, sad, and glad. And so I can see that for many parents and guardians, this would be something that they themselves have to learn, and then then they can pass it on to the children that are in their lives too. So I think it's a learning curve for everyone.
Yeah, it's a great point. And so I will mention Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart. She also has a Netflix special and this newer one on HBO Max, as well as the book. There's also things like emotion wheels that you could readily find on the internet. If you just type in emotion wheels, it'd be like, all these emotions, all this stuff. It's a great thing to do as an activity and say, where do you feel that in your body? On a scale of 1 to 10, how strong does that feel? Okay. How about we, do something different and see how that changes? That's all really, really good stuff. Really important.
I
Yeah,
really like how you say how it feels in your body and what it looks like, because it's really that concrete piece, especially for younger children, right? To have
absolutely.
something they can anchor into. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to not just be stuck in anger. Because often when it's identified what's underneath that anger, guess what? That outer anger just kind of melts, right? If somebody's feeling safe enough to be able to tune in and express it. It gives us lots more options on how to go forward. The other piece is noticing our thinking, right? Our helpful thinking. So again, if we have a strong feeling about something, it's worth it to tease it out. Well, what's the thought connected with that, right? And a really simple way to think about that is this thought building me up or beating me up, right? Is that a true thought? Is there evidence to support that? Is that something that I would say to a friend if somebody's really being self-critical, right? And again, this is kind of basic around cognitive behavioral therapy, but you don't have to be a therapist to have some conversations about what are you telling yourself, and it's okay to learn sooner than later that all of our thoughts, they're kind of like pictures in our heads and words, but they're not necessarily true, right? They're just a thought. And sometimes our first thought is not our best thought, right? So if you hear kids saying, your child saying, "Oh, I'm going to blow this test today. It's going to be horrible," say, "Okay, it sounds like you're worried about it," right? And like try to help them talk about it, but what would be the consequences if you lost it? Do you think I wouldn't love you anymore? Oh no. What percentage was that again? Oh, I think it's worth 3% of my final grade. It's like, oh, okay. What would be helpful? What's something you can remind yourself, right? And so sometimes those thoughts that we tell ourselves that are like all or nothing thinking or overgeneralizing, again, what you don't want to do as a parent is get trapped into constantly reassuring your child, because then that feels like the whack-a-mole game, right? You're trying to be the reassurer and they keep coming up with yeah buts and you get trapped and they're seeking that reassurance, and it could be quite quite a thinking trap. So the more that you can cue them to say, oh, I hear that. What do you think is a more helpful thought, right? And help them kind of gain that skill. Or even, this is another counselor trick, the thought, I'm having the thought that I'm going to blow the test, right? Because then it's a little bit separate from them, that it's a thought, right? It's not the absolute truth. It's a thought. It's an old pattern, or the story I'm telling myself is this, right? So it takes away some of that power.
So you wouldn't want to argue with them and tell them, no, that's not the way
Right.
you feel, right? You want
Right.
to
Oh, yeah.
let it come from them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you can do some teaching about that. And the other thing is you can use yourself, like, oh, I really got myself in a pickle today. I was really worried about something. I got an email. I felt stressed about it. And then I realized what I was telling myself. So that's a really great way to do it, right? To kind of model that, right? Or you're watching a show together. It's like, oh, I wonder what that person's telling themselves. Oh, wow. Right. So just kind of raising the conversation about that. But it's okay to throw in there every once in a while about our first thought might not be our best thought, or I can't believe everything we think. It's kind of catchy too. Yeah. Problem solving. Here's a big one. Here's my soapbox for parents, because I think we really get it. We were taking this baby home from the hospital, and by the way, like I was, early 30s, social worker. I'd worked as a child, and I'm like, they're just letting me leave the hospital with this. In fact, I don't know what I'm doing, right? Most parents can relate to, like, wow, So we get it around love and protect. We don't have it. That's kind of a given. But sometimes what parents kind of need to be reminded, and certainly I did, is like our job, besides loving and protecting our kids, is preparing them to meet the challenges in the world, right? And so we want them to practice at home in a safe way, so that when they're out in the world, they're like, I recognize this world because I practiced for it at home, right? And so in our efforts to provide so well for our parents sometimes, or for our children, sometimes we don't give them enough opportunity to practice their problem solving and to make mistakes, right? And to figure things out and rely on themselves. So one parent actually in a presentation said, you know what, I looked at this picture and I'm like, oh, that child is walking across the street on their own. She realized, she goes, I'm naming it, I can be overprotective, right? I can be, the mama bear in me would not want my child to be crossing a street, right? So we have to watch that tendency, and we also have to be thinking about how can we help our kids be better problem solvers. And I would suggest to you that these cell phones aren't necessarily so helpful, because it's too easy to micromanage kids' lives with them. It can be like a long umbilical cord, right? This is like when I went to school and there wasn't any of that. If I had an issue with my friend Carol, I'd have to figure it out, right? If there was no parent to help me decipher that. And so here's the tricky part. When kids bring us issues that they're dealing with, and of course, we have to think about, is this an age appropriate issue that they're dealing with? If it is, the first words out of our mouths should be, what do you think you should do about that? Right? And then zip it. That's the hardest, right? I know my husband and I used to go like, okay, we've got like 100 and some years of life experience between us. We want to tell our son what to do, but we need to encourage him to figure some things out. He was offered 2 jobs, for example. It was real clear to us what we thought would be the better, but it wasn't our lives, right? We had to let him figure out that. So you can guide your child, of course, but the role really changes from being, having all the responsibility when they're younger to when they're older, moving into more of that consultant role, not always carrying the worry ball for them, right? We got to let that go, because maybe the best learning is when they make mistakes and things don't go so well. And I would invite you to think about your own lives and think about, did I learn more from when things went really smoothly, or when there were issues and problems and when I messed up? So we have to give our children the gift of feeling the consequences for their actions. Gasp. So not easy, but important. Because think about it. What's the message to kids if we ask them what they think they should do and, help them explore it? What is the unstated message that we're telling them?
We're showing them that we have confidence in their abilities, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Make a good decision. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that many are, I think not having good problem solving skills really underlies lots of anxious coping, right? Makes sense, right? Because if a child has that confidence, well, I can deal with it. I can cope. I can manage. That can go a long way in dealing with uncomfortable, anxious feelings. So I really, really encourage parents to do this. And it starts, can start young, with little things like offering kids lots of choices that they have to think about. And when they're young, it can be, do you want a red cup or a blue cup? Do you want these PJs or those PJs? Do you want, give them lots of kinds of choices. If they have an allowance, let them blow it and feel sad for them when they've blown their allowance because they have to wait. But that's good learning. Because maybe if they're, realizing that money is something to spend carefully, maybe they'll think twice before they go to buy a car without, lemon of a car without checking that out first. So it's good to practice making lots of mistakes and learning from them when they're young.
Well, and I think too, helping them see that growth comes from making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, that, if we don't allow ourselves to learn from it, we miss those opportunities for growth. And helping our kids recognize that sometimes will serve them very well as they get older and don't have, their parents to rely on as much. I had one question, Kathy. If you are a parent and you know that you tend to be a little bit overprotective, again, I think COVID has affected this as well, because we all spent a lot of time together and we had a lot of, close time. And maybe, do you have any tips for parents who are trying to maybe figure out ways to not be as protective, or maybe loosen the reins a little bit? Do you have any tips for those parents who are trying to make those choices but are finding it a little difficult?
I think that's a great question, Claire. And I don't know if I have a magic answer to this, but I would suggest even recognizing that it goes a long way, right? So even talking to your child about that, to say, I know I have that tendency. Can you let me know? Can we have some ground rules about things? Can you assure me that, of course, I'm going to worry about you when you're out at night. Let's talk about, older kids. What can you do to kind of assure me that you're safe and that I'll back off the worry train? So maybe it's like, if I'm going to be later than the time I said, I will text you. Perfect. Right. Those kinds of things. So I think there can be collaboration with that. But yeah, I would bring it up. I would talk about it. Of course, we're going to worry. And don't we all know as parents now I think back like, okay, I can see how I caused my parents some worry when I was off to Belize and didn't check in very often, for example, right? So, you wear a different hat when you're a parent too, when you're a young person. But yeah, I think it's an important thing to talk about. And I think I did my best parenting when I remembered to zip it sometimes. Really hard. But to try to see our children in their strengths too, to give them that message that we see them as competent and we see them as being able to solve problems, goes a long way. And again, as you had said, I just want to pick up more about what you said, Claire, about the gift of making mistakes, right? We want to try to get away from that trap of perfectionism. If we have those traits with ourselves, something else to model and talk about. I read a really interesting study, for example, just about this whole perfectionism thing. There was 2 classes at a university, and it was around photography. So like, what's the point of this? I'll get to it in a sec. So half of the class, we're going to be graded on submitting 100 decent photographs, right, for this photography class. And the other half of the class, we're going to be graded on this. The prof said, you don't have to do 100, just give me your best, your one, like spend all your time getting like the most amazing picture and submit that, right? And so many of the students thought, okay, well, that'll be the way to go instead of 100. At the end of it, who do you think submitted like the very best photographs? The ones that submitted 100 or the ones that spent all their time trying to hone and craft the very best photo? Which one's actually got a better grade
I
for,
know the study, so it's.
pardon me?
I've read the study, so.
Oh, good, good.
It was the ones that put the 100.
Yes, yes,
They were open to opportunities through.
exactly.
Yeah.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Right? So we have to get over ourselves around how perfectionism can really stop us cold and just kind of make lots of mistakes and experiment and get in the muck, right? So exactly.
And I
Yes.
think parents too are going to make mistakes. And we need to recognize that that's part of our growth too as parents, so.
Beautifully said, Chris. That's it. We're going to mess up. We're going to make mistakes. And kids can be quite forgiving too, especially we have that, I was thinking about how I handled this. And I wish I would have handled that differently. I mean, that's important growth, right? To move and grow together for sure. And so this relates to the stress response curve and how to handle that. So guess what? So this is kind of like a level of arousal that it'll go up for a time where we'll be most highly aroused. This is time on the bottom and then kind of subsides. So step one is that thinking, what are we thinking that's causing this reaction? Step two is the problem solving. What can we do about it? And step three is all that physiological arousal. Now, the thing is, if somebody's really heightened, really, really upset, we're not doing our best thinking then, right? So at this point, at the top, you need to be able to kind of bring stress levels down. And that's where you hear all of the talk about deep breathing, different kinds of exercises, and different things work for different people. For some people, it's doing something really physical can really help to lower the stress level, right? For someone else, it is really paying attention to that diaphragmatic breathing. There's different ways, different techniques to do that. But again, what doesn't get enough attention is, what am I thinking about? That's having this stress reaction, and what can I do about it, right? So these ones are worth noting, right? So the more that we take care of this and think about checking our thinking and thinking about what we can do differently. If we're really nervous about a test, problem solving might be studying for it. Just saying, And so what happens is then the stress level maybe doesn't get as high. Right. So that's important. Now, there's some people out there who, physiologically, there can even sometimes be things in the environment that trigger that. For some people who are really, they're running on a motor and they're feeling so shaky inside and all of that, sometimes there's a place for medication just to bring that physiological arousal down a little bit so that they can learn to implement these other strategies. So I just thought I would mention how what we're talking about can really relate to how we deal with stress. Yeah. And then talking about, this conversation about what can we do to boost mental health. And so here's what we call the pillars of health, the big 5 to thrive. And they're deceivingly simple. So, but again, not easy, right? So how many of us get the recommended amount of exercise? Certainly there's children, it's the kids that are on the sports teams that most assuredly get the right amount of exercise, but most others not. And most of us as adults, there's some people out there, bless you, that are getting the amount of exercise. I know that I can pick it up. And I think sometimes the word exercise is so loaded. That's why I put in the word movement, right? That more is better than nothing. Right? If we can get up and move and dance and just see how to bring more movement into one's day is really important. So if you can think of some things that you can do as a family to get more active, that's beautiful and can make great great memories too. If Saturday morning is clean up the house, can you put on some music and kind of pick up the pace for cleaning? Different strokes for different folks, but adding more movement in is super important. Another thing with mental health is if we're exercising and moving, it teaches our brain that our behavior matters. Like that in itself is important, right? As well as all of the neurochemical reactions and effects there. So at Star Catholic, is there, emphasis on getting moving and keeping moving?
I've seen some unique things in our buildings, yeah, for sure. Things to do down the hallway and little, footprints on the walls, and just to get more engaged as you walk down the hallway. Awesome. Even though we're supposed to walk down the hallway silently.
Right.
There is opportunity for movement.
Right.
So, yeah.
I know whenever we were out on walks with our kids and they would get tired or, oh, I don't want to do this hike or something, we would, play around with who's leading the silly walk, and everybody else had to copy and follow. So a good sense of ha-ha and fun and silliness can be good. I was in a workshop recently and the person stopped and said, okay, everybody, somebody took turns mimicking a sport that everybody had to do the movement. And maybe it was just 2, 3, 5 minutes of movement was really a good thing. We probably should do it now.
Yeah, I know for educators, certainly there's been way more awareness of this. I would say as we learn more about our brains and brain development and how our bodies and physical movement affects our brains, I think there's been way more awareness of this as educators. So even taking those brain breaks and doing, pause and, everyone get up, stand up and stretch, or we're going to do, 5 minutes of physical activity, even standing beside our desks. I think our teachers are just so much more ready to do that. Whereas, I think of when I was going through school and it was, you sat on your desk and you didn't move for fear that the teacher would, call you out. So I think, we have such a better awareness of how our brains work and how our bodies affect our attention and how we're thinking and all of those sorts of things.
Absolutely. Getting up and writing a word out with your elbow or something like that. As well as I just want to mention getting outside is so important. And probably, that was a saving grace for me during the pandemic, was walking my dog. But there's research to talk about even, vitamin D hitting your eyes, how important that is. We think of it as our skin, but hitting the eyes is really important. And just getting the light is so important for hormonal resets and stuff. So if it can be in the morning, if you can, of course, don't stare into the sun, but if you get some natural light without sunglasses, it's really, really excellent for one's mental health, brain development. Sufficient sleep. We are sleep deprived, adults and children for the most part. If you can proudly say that you're not, bravo, fantastic. But for many, that's an area that it really makes a difference if that can be improved. So I'm going to say here parents are where you have to be the fun suckers, the vacuum, the fun vacuums, and say we're setting a rule here to not have phones, to not have laptops and iPads in the bedroom after a certain amount of time. And some parents are like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Or the kids will say, I use that as my alarm clock. You know what? You can get a clock radio for $5 at Value Village last time I checked, or something else, or you can change the Wi-Fi code, right? So that the kids can't be on all night. And my daughter once came to me, she didn't like this house rule, but she said, I heard amongst my friends there was a lot of drama last night, and I'm really glad that I missed it, that I didn't, 2 a.m, frantic text to each other about something. And so she kind of admitted to me that she didn't mind that I was the fun sucker there, and that she was able to get sleep. And so, getting a routine as much as you can for the family, for sleep makes a huge difference, tremendous difference in wellness. And I know that there's some physicians out there, before they get out the prescription pad, they're really looking at these, making changes for this can go a long way. positive supportive relationships, those kinds of connections, again, really key. I was just, again, maybe it was it was a seminar, a webinar I was hearing about the Harvard longevity study that started in 1938. And of course, there was only men that were going to Harvard then, but they've studied these men and even their families over time. And the number one factor that they could see for longevity was good interpersonal relationships, positive relationships. Makes a huge difference in our wellness. Healthy nutrition as well. Of course, there's lots of different competing beliefs out there: keto, vegan, paleo, all kinds of others that I don't know. But truly, we kind of know the basics around, eat more plants, eat real food, more plants, not too much. And again, that doesn't mean you can never have a treat, right? That can be a really fun thing. But if you can get nutrition, that's important. And I know that families are under a lot of pressure right now with budgeting and stuff. But lentils and beans and starchy vegetables that fill you up are all really, really good choices. And you might be thinking, well, I can't get vegetables into my kids. Well, the more you can involve them in cooking, the more they often are willing to enjoy. That I know when I started having my kids help make the salad or concoct a dressing for the salad or something, they were much more interested in eating those kinds of food. So it's something to really be paying attention to. And around budgeting and stuff, I know there's I was just thinking of a friend who, she said she was stretching the family food budget, and she started to think about what was all in the pantry, and they started to have a fun time with pulling out cans and different stuff in the pantry and almost having like a chop challenge. What are we going to make out of this? And I thought, attitude counts a lot, right? I've even thought back as an adult, I thought, I remember having pancakes for supper, or I remember having, I bet my mom was stretching the food budget then. I wasn't even aware, right? So kids will really take the cue from you about how things are going. So something to be aware of. The last point there that I think doesn't get enough attention either is about helping others. Like, we all need to feel purposeful and that we can make a difference. And I'm sure that fits in Star Catholic with your, faith-based education about that, how can we help others and support others? And even young children, it can be little things. When I was working with psychological first aid and I was working up in Fort McMurray at a reception center, the kids loved making cards for the firemen, right? So it's important to all of us to feel like what we do matters and that we can be helpful to others. It's so good for one's mental health and for community as well. Anything to add there, Claire?
Yeah. I was just going to say, yeah, that absolutely fits into our Catholic social teachings for sure. And I know that all of our grades always have some sort of service project or charity project that they're working on. And we have found just kids are so willing to help, and they love to help, and they love to think of others. And it's, even as our kids get older, we often think that teens, they don't care about anybody but themselves. But man, when teens get excited about something and they feel like there's been an injustice in the world, they can become so passionate about that. And I just am constantly encouraging people to let teens be passionate about these things and find things that they can really kind of dig their teeth in and find ways that they can help, because it does kind of get them out of themselves and really look at, I can make a difference in the world. And that makes a difference to me in the way I feel about myself and the world as a whole.
Beautifully said. Yeah, so important on so many levels. And the little note here at the bottom on this slide is about a good routine helps. The other idea about that is that, kids thrive with some predictability as well, right? To expect things. And so even, helping others, if that's kind of a family value, if there's something that families can do together, it means a tremendous amount. And when we talked about, kids taking the cue from adults and from their parents. When there's a disconnect between what we say and what our nonverbals are, what is believed is the nonverbals, right? For example, like, I'm not mad at all. You're going to not believe that I'm, calm about that, right? So keep that in mind when you're delivering messages to kiddos. They're going to pick stuff up. If so, it's better to even say, honestly, I am worried about something at work, or am, concerned about that. You don't want to be inappropriately dumping your problems on kids, but it's okay to have some authenticity. So you're making their world safer and more stable and dependable when you are authentic, and when you keep some routines and you put your best foot forward, but you're real with them. You're not loading your problems onto them, but they are figuring out that what they're seeing is what they can believe, if that makes sense. Just a little quote to have a little chuckle. So it's challenging, the teenage years. Part of it is they are going to be pushing, right? Pushing boundaries. That's part of their job. You're going to be trying to hold some stability and set some boundaries. And that's why you go to bed tired, right? That it can be a bit of a challenge. Yeah. I have a friend who said, my parents took me to Europe and I pretended I didn't know them. And I sat somewhere else. Now I'm so ashamed. Like, where was my head? But part of that is kids trying to differentiate, right, at that age and all of that. So sometimes it's having some patience with that, but also, treating yourself decently, right? Doesn't mean that you should be a doormat for a kid's poor behavior, because that's really not doing them any favors either. It doesn't make them very nice.
I was just going to say, and now on the flip side, I'm 42, and sometimes my parents pretend that they don't know me. So it really comes back.
Oh, that's funny. Somehow I don't believe you. But, yeah. So were there other questions that you'd like me to address? Because I can just keep talking, but. Oh yeah, there's some more strategies coming up, but should I just keep going about some tips, because it is hard as parents? I guess we promised you some strategies. So if maybe
I think so. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. So of course, the finger wagging, the anger that we can, if we get upset with our child's behavior, they can get a lot of anger from us. The problem with that is, most of us in the heat of an argument don't think about, well, that was a really good point you made. Oh, I see your perspective now, right? What happens if we're really angry? We armor up and get defensive, and then learning doesn't really happen so well, right? So this first one from Parenting with Love and Logic really was a game changer for my husband, for example, whose parents had ruled by, do as I say and that's it. He realized when he took a different approach with our kids that they were able to hear him out more, and there was lots less anger in the house, right? So we can be kind of sad when they make a mistake or mess up, and that's not letting them off the hook. It's actually allows a child to not be as defensive and to actually take in the consequences. I remember when my mom was sad or disappointed in me, and that was crushing. I think I would have preferred that she was just angry at me, right? So again, that preserves the relationship if you can choose to take that tone instead of anger, which elicits a lot of defensiveness. The idea of enforceable statements, the idea of that is you do have a lot of influence and power. Guess what? Your kids need you for things. And the nice thing about an enforceable statement is it's something that you can control. So if you say, unload the dishwasher, your child may or may not do that, or might, but if you say, I'm willing to drive you to the mall after you've unloaded the dishwasher, that's an enforceable statement, right? You're putting in I statements, and you have control over that. So it's a good thing to practice, to be doing that. Or I'm willing to talk to you about that when you can talk to me in a more respectful tone. I'll wait for you, right? So that can put you in more control. Again, if you can express empathy for where your child's at and then let consequences teach. So again, that will help with their problem solving. It will also help with keeping your relationship strong so that they can feel and learn from a consequence. A natural consequence is best, right? So you're not rescuing them. Let's say they forget to bring their runners to school. You can be sad that maybe they're going to have to miss out on some fun, but you don't have to drive, the 40 minutes to school to drop those off. You can just let them feel that. So maybe next time they'll pack up their backpack and remember that, right? Because they had to miss out, right? So, and again, the idea of timeouts, of course, that's a tried and true thing. But sometimes as parents, we need to give ourselves a little timeout, right? You can say, oh, that's upsetting. I'm gonna have to think about that. But I'm, or I need to collect myself before we talk about it. And you give yourself a timeout to kind of recalibrate and think about the next steps instead of engaging in heated arguments. Does that make sense? Yeah. And of course, there's lots of resources out there that kind of gives you more ideas for all of this. And of course, it changes with ages and stages of your children. But it really is something that really helped me in my parenting, that's for sure, was the Parenting with Love and Logic stuff. This is kind of when we, there was an earlier question about when should we be worried for our child. So again, this is kind of a graph that just shows the normal moods that, we all have a different kind of baseline. And within a day, within time, our moods, or over time, our moods are going to go up and down. And that's pretty normal to kind of be around our different baselines. When we need to be worried is maybe when it's almost like the thermostat's broken and their child is way down in their baseline, child or adult. And that's something to be concerned about. So sometimes people will be like, well, they can't be too bad because they were laughing with a friend. But overall, you're noticing that they're really struggling. Or they might be really, really a lot more anxious and more aroused than they normally are. Then that's the opportunity to kind of let them know, like check in with them and have that conversation with what's going on for them. The idea of this is also, you think, well, what are these slides doing in here? Wanted to talk to you a little bit about what happens if something goes a little off the rails, if a child makes a mistake. So I wanted to give you a little experience of, let's say this was you in this situation. There was a speed limit posted. Perhaps you weren't paying attention. Perhaps you were late, and away you went. And guess what? We're stopped by the police, right? In the first circumstance, maybe the police officer yells at you and screams at you, and you might feel really defensive. The second instance is maybe the police officer says, hello, ma'am. The speed limit is 30 and I have you clocked here at 52 kilometers. You have some choices here. You can pay this way or you can pay that way. And I hope you have a better day. So for the first scenario or the second scenario, in which case do you think I would be more likely to take responsibility for my actions?
Definitely the second one.
Exactly. And so I think it's a really good lesson to know how we can get through to kids, right? If we can be reasonable, we can let them know kind of where they messed up, and maybe they have some options about repairing it, right? To kind of put back some positive energy to the house, or maybe they have some ideas of how they can make something better. That goes a lot further than just being angry and yelling at them. And then I also like to use this example of sometimes we over-explain to kids because they messed up and they know it, right? So imagine this was a scenario and you're telling your spouse about it, and they were like, well, there's a speed limit posted, and you're like, yeah. So you have to match that up with how hard you press the gas pedal, right? And And wouldn't you be like, I know, right? And yet that sounds so silly, but isn't that exactly what we do to kids a lot? Like they know, trust me, they know when they've messed up, and yet we can go on and on and on and sound like one of the parents on the Peanuts commercial, wah, 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 right? Because we over explain and we go over and over about what they did wrong. And maybe we could just save our breath there. And, if they need more explanation, if they truly don't know how they messed up, we can, well, they know. And if they really want that explanation, you can provide it. But remember this little example of how hard that is to hear if your spouse dared to explain to you how the problem with going over a speed limit is, right? That's exactly what we do to kids.
Yeah. That's where the rolling eyes and the I know comes out.
Exactly.
Yeah. We do have a question that came through the chat, and I just want to make sure I ask it before we end. And it's looking at how do we best support or help teens who are being teased by their friends and are really kind of focused on that external validation that is very common for teens. So really, as parents and guardians, how can we help our kids not seek that external validation, or I guess base their own self-worth on what other people are saying or doing?
Oh, that's so important and so hard, right? So I think part of it is even just having that conversation about it, because again, I was watching Brene Brown today. She's talking about we're just even wired for comparison, even if we don't want to be comparing ourselves, but stuff on social media and stuff, kids all the time are comparing themselves. And if someone is just really treating them poorly about that, that's something to really be very empathic about and try to equip them with what do they think they can do to kind of maybe stand up for themselves, or to think about, where are they going to put their trust in their relationships? Is there some things that they can say or make clearer to whoever is saying some unkind things? There's the saying that Brene Brown has about marble jar friends. Like, what relationships have you really invested in that maybe they kind of earn the right to your story to be more vulnerable? And if people are not being kind and they don't have that kind of relationship, how can you defend yourself in that way? And that might be a place where they deserve more concrete supports and ideas about that. What can they do? Can you help them? Can they even practice what they can say? How can you build them up some more about that? And again, to not, even though that can be really upsetting, you have to kind of watch how involved you are. Is it something that they really can handle and deftly manage those kinds of relationships? Or is it more serious bullying where adults do actually need to get involved? That's any thoughts from the school side about handling that?
I think there's a lot of discussions within our, curriculums and things like that of how to handle things like that. And we do have support workers within our buildings that teens can go and talk to. And that might be an easier avenue than bringing the home into it at that point, because then they're working with the peer group, right? And they're working with the staff at the schools. But
Yeah, understood. Well, that's really important. I was just going to say there's more resources on our website of mentalhealthliteracy.org. It's like parenting your teen and teening your parent. Again, it's being able to talk together about some of the common issues that can come up. And we talked about not overdoing it on social media, and here's all our ways to connect on social media, part of our world. And again, it's not all social media is bad, but it's how is it serving us or not? And is there something that we're doing online that's so much that it's taking away from other times? I'm sorry, I just looked at the time. We're over time, aren't we?
That's okay. I feel like we could talk about this topic for like days. and probably not address everything that we would want to address. But one of the things that before we leave, I just want to remind everyone about is that there are a lot of resources available at our schools as well. So if you have concerns about anything that is going on with your child, that we would really encourage you to first and foremost reach out to staff at the school. So certainly your child's classroom teacher or a staff member that they know and that they trust, that they connect with often, because then that staff member, can discuss the concerns with you and with your child if appropriate. And then they'll be able to connect the rest of the school support team if needed. And we can really wrap around your child and your family and really provide those important supports so that we are meeting the needs of your child. We don't ever want you to feel like you are unsupported or your child is unsupported. So we just really want to encourage you to reach out to the appropriate staff members at your school. And that, like I said, it could be a classroom teacher, it could be the family support liaison worker, it could be the administrator, it could be the counselor at the school, or a staff member that you know and that you trust, and then they can get the appropriate supports involved. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, Chris, but it's really important that you reach out if you have any concerns.
Yes, and have that conversation, really starting with the classroom teacher. They usually have a big connection with your child. And we also have central office supports that we can support the schools with. So that's where Michelle Horbe comes in. She's our division wellness coordinator, and we're able to access her to help should the need arise. So like Claire said, it's very much a wraparound approach from Star Catholic, and we consider Kathy to be part of our approach at this point. So thank you, Kathy.
My pleasure. And I guess the final word for parents to take care of yourselves. That's good modeling for your kids too, right? To not try to give from an empty well. And it's a tough job, and there's supports out for you as well. And so with Alberta Health Services, there's Triple P Parenting, there's Community Education Services that has all kinds of experts all the time on all kinds of topics, all free online.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so thank you for attending tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight, and for making our kids, we consider, all of our kids, for making our kids' mental health a priority. We know that it's so important for us to really, as a team, help support mental health in our kids. We are going to be hosting one more virtual parent session this year. I believe we have it scheduled for May, but look for communication regarding that session coming up. We'd love to see lots of you to join us again. And again, Kathy, thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your wisdom and your expertise. We are so blessed to have you as part of our team. We could not do these without you, for sure. And you just have such a wealth of experience. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. We are very grateful to have you as a partner in this work that we're doing around student mental health. And blessings to everyone on your way, wherever you happen to be, and have a blessed Holy Week next week. Next week is the high point of the liturgical church year. So, hopefully you will be able to spend time with your families and just really celebrate Easter as it arrives. So thank you for being with us, and hopefully we'll see you next time.